Hello and welcome to Explore Learning Gizmos. We're going to jump right in and I'm going to show you what gizmos look like and how they can be used in your class. This video, we're going to look at what is a gizmo and what is available with each lesson. So this lesson is on flower pollination. Gizmos are available for math and science content areas for grades 3 through 12. So each lesson comes with a student exploration sheet, a teacher guide, the answer key, and vocabulary. So I've already opened the student exploration sheet, and what you can see is that they start with vocabulary, giving them just the vocabulary, no definitions, no nothing yet. They ask students for prior knowledge, and what I use this for is for like a bell ringer or a think before you do activity. If I don't do this right at the beginning of my lesson, I will stop and not let students log into the gizmo until they have answered these prior knowledge questions. It kind of gives them an idea of what this might be about, as well as let me know if they have some prior knowledge that I wasn't aware of before. Then we all do the gizmo warm up together. This allows the students to kind of go through it, see how the gizmo works, as well as kind of get their feet wet with the vocabulary. All the vocabulary is mostly right in this space. Then there are typically 2 to 3 activities for each lesson, and they sort of increase in difficulty or they increase in inquiry. So activity A would be about pollination. And so this is just talking about the steps of how plants pollinate, and it asks them to name the steps, and I'll show you how they would do that within this gizmo. It talks about cross pollination and things like that. Now, for my students, I would use this part, this activity B, because my fifth graders do not typically need to know about pollination. That's not part of my standard. But they do need to know the parts of the plant. And so we do this part first. They have to make connections to each of the parts of the plant and be able to think and discuss. This is a very short gizmo. It's something that I can do within one class period. So I would typically give my students the link to the gizmo as well as a copy of the student sheet. And this is the gizmo. So there is a pollination tab and an identification tab. If we go back to here, each of the activities has a how do I get the gizmo ready? How do I know that I'm ready to begin? So for activity A, they'd be in the pollination tab, but for activity B, and for the purposes of this video, we're going to be in the identification tab. So it says identification. It gives them all the different flower parts, and it says drag the words into the spaces to label the flower. So my students don't know what the parts are yet, typically when I do this. But if they know anything about a plant, they know that it has a petal. They might know about pollen. They might even know about a pollen tube. So they can kind of use some kind of deduction to figure out where they go. So it says to drag the 10 listed flower parts to the blanks in the diagram, and when it's labeled correctly, information about the part appears below. So a lot of times it asks them to click a camera icon to take a snapshot, and then they could copy and paste the snapshot into a Word document. I typically don't do that with my students. I let them either take a screenshot and drop it directly into the um, assessment or the activity log if I'm using it in Google Docs. If not, we just skip over it. The best part about Gizmos is that you can make it fit your class and your students. Not every piece needs to be done every single time, but it does allow for students to have a choice if you'd like them to, or for you to have a choice on what exactly your students are getting. So I would allow the students to drag and drop, and it's not clicked, but information. So it gives them the definition of the part of the plant, which then they can come back over here and use to test themselves. Now, just because you're on this page does not mean the lesson information has gone away for you. On the teacher side, you can also see the teacher guide. Tells you objectives, vocabulary, overview, suggested sequencing and pacing, discussion questions for you to go through. This was so helpful for me as a first year teacher to have these discussion questions available, because although I have a strong science background before I started teaching, the inquiry piece and the bringing up discussion was where I definitely struggled as a first year teacher. There's also some background on why are we studying this? What is the scientific purpose of this gizmo? And it gives you the scientific background. It gives you a historical connection. It gives you environmental connections. And it even gives you more resources. So if a kid says, oh man, I have somebody who I know would dissect a flower so we could look at it. Here you go. Flower dissection lab. Interactive sites. Animals as pollinators. All these different websites that your students can use to research beyond this gizmo. And as always, answer keys and vocabulary. So you could have students even explore this or come over here to pollination and you can talk about what pollination is and things like that. For the purposes of today, we're not going to do that. You could then have students come down here and take assessment questions if you are using the classes version of this. If not, you can always just put them up as a whole class or use some kind of whiteboard response, clickers, something like that to get their answers. You could even put them in a Google form if you'd really like to. And then they would be able to check their answers. Stay tuned for more.